She was hired to teach history, not to become part of it. Her name was Layla Nasser, 31, educated, precise, with a voice soft enough to calm even the wildest students. She had left her small town near Alexandria for a teaching position that promised stability and respect. She didn't know then that respect in some places is conditional, granted only until you are seen too clearly. The royal family's private academy stood like a jewel in the desert, glass halls, marble floors, fountains that whispered wealth. Teachers were chosen not only for their talent, but for their discretion. Layla understood that. She'd been warned, never gossip, never ask questions, never look too long at the royal sons. The prince she would meet, Amir bin Rashid, was 19, brilliant, reckless. He'd been educated everywhere and nowhere. His grades came second to his charm. His future was written in gold. Everyone called him Your Highness. She called him Amir, only once, and that once would echo for years. It began quietly, as all disasters do. Amir arrived late to her first class. He stood by the door, eyes half amused, and said, "You're the new one." She nodded, asked him to sit. The other students waited to see how she'd handle him, the untouchable heir who turned every reprimand into theater. She didn't flinch. She handed him the syllabus, continued the lesson, and never mentioned it again. That was the moment he noticed her. In a world that bent for him, she did not. The following week, he lingered after class, asking about a reading she'd assigned, a poem by Gibran about love and responsibility. "Do you believe love and duty can coexist?" he asked, leaning on her desk. She hesitated. "They have to," she said. "Otherwise, everything breaks." He smiled. "Maybe that's why things break anyway." She told him to focus on his exams. He laughed, a sound that carried both youth and warning. He started coming early, bringing her tea, asking about books she liked. It was harmless, or so she told herself. He was just a curious student, privileged, bored, fascinated by someone who didn't treat him like royalty. But fascination is a spark that doesn't need fuel. One afternoon, during a sandstorm that swallowed the city in gold dust, the power went out in the school. She stayed behind to secure the classroom windows. When she turned, he was there, his hair wet, his white shirt streaked with sand. "Everyone left," he said, "except you." "Go home," she replied. "It's not safe." He stepped closer. "Neither are you." For a moment, the storm outside filled the silence between them. The lights flickered back on, and she saw his eyes. Not of a prince then, but of a boy who didn't yet understand that wanting can destroy. She stepped away. "You should leave." He didn't argue, but when he left, she knew she had been seen. Not as a teacher, not as a woman of boundaries, but as someone he now considered part of his story. The next day, a white rose appeared on her desk. No note, no signature, just the flower. The guards noticed nothing. The cameras showed nothing. But the gesture spoke louder than any confession. She threw it away, then lay awake that night, replaying the way it had looked under the classroom light. Delicate, forbidden, beautiful. Weeks passed. The school resumed its rhythm. Lectures, ceremonies, rehearsals for National Day. Yet something beneath the surface had changed. He lingered at the edge of her lessons, watched her hands as she wrote on the board, volunteered for every project that required her supervision. When she avoided his gaze, he smiled as if it were a game. When she finally spoke to him privately, to set boundaries, to end it before it began, he only said, "You think this is something I can stop? You think it's that easy?" "It must be," she said, "because I can." But she couldn't. Not when her heart started to betray her discipline. Not when his words began to sound less like arrogance and more like understanding. Not when she realized that in a city full of glass, she'd finally met someone who made her feel seen. It was dangerous, yes. But danger is only frightening until it feels like freedom. He started sending letters, real ones, written in ink, folded so precisely they looked like origami. He never signed them, but she knew. She kept them in a drawer she never opened twice. In the last one, he wrote, "Every law that forbids love was written by someone who has never been loved enough to disobey." She should have reported it. She didn't, because by then, she was already breaking the same law. Their first real meeting outside school happened by accident, or so she believed. She was at a bookstore in Dara when she heard his voice behind her. "You have good taste," he said, holding a copy of The Prophet. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the kind of electricity that comes from being caught in the exact moment you swore you'd avoid. They talked for hours, about books, about the city, about how lonely power can be. She told herself it was harmless, but when he offered her a ride home and she accepted, she knew the line was gone. He dropped her off 2 streets from her apartment. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For pretending to be ordinary." He smiled. "It's the first honest thing I've done in months." And with that, he left. But not before she saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than his title ever could: sincerity. By the end of that month, the rumors began. The Palace School was small. Teachers whispered, students noticed. One evening, the headmistress called her into the office. "You're a good teacher," she said, "but good isn't enough when people start to talk. Be careful what you let them see." Layla nodded. "They see what they want," the headmistress sighed. "In this city, perception is the truth. It should have ended there. But love, once spoken, has no undo button." He sent her a phone, untraceable. They talked in messages full of code and poetry. He told her he wanted to leave the country with her, that he was tired of being a symbol, tired of smiling for cameras that never captured who he was. She told him to stop dreaming. He told her he already had. And then, the night everything changed. A message at 1:14 a.m. "They know." She didn't reply. Her hands shook. "Don't come to the school tomorrow, please." Then silence. By morning, news spread through the palace corridors. The prince's car had been found on the coastal highway, overturned. No witnesses, no explanation. And that was how her story began to end. The morning after the accident, the sky over Dubai was too clear, as if the city refused to mourn. Layla woke to the sound of her phone vibrating endlessly. Messages from colleagues, the headmistress, numbers she didn't recognize. Every word looked the same. Prince Amir. Accident. Hospitalized. Her chest went hollow. She didn't remember getting dressed, only the cold sting of the water as she splashed her face and the ache in her throat that came from not breathing properly. She took a taxi to the school, but classes had been suspended. Security guards stood at the gates, their posture rigid, their eyes alert to suspicion. By noon, the announcement came, official, polished, cold. His Highness Prince Amir bin Rashid has suffered injuries in a car accident late last night. He is in stable condition. No other individuals were harmed. Stable. The word felt like a lie. By evening, the story shifted. It was no longer a simple accident. The press began whispering about another vehicle, a civilian car reportedly seen near the crash site. A woman's car. No details, no names, only implication. Layla's neighbor knocked on her door that night. "Are you all right?" she asked. "The police were here earlier. They were asking about your car." Layla froze. "What did you tell them?" "That I haven't seen you drive in days." Layla smiled weakly, thanked her, closed the door, and leaned against it until her knees gave way. The next morning, the police came for her anyway. Not with sirens, not with handcuffs. Just a polite knock and a phrase that sounded almost kind. "We just need to ask a few questions, Miss Layla." She followed them in silence. The station was cold, the kind of cold that makes time move slower. They asked about the prince, about her car, about the calls. She denied everything. She said she was his teacher, nothing more. They smiled, the way people smile when they already know the answer. One of them, a man with kind eyes, slid a file across the table. Inside, a printed text message. "You make me feel real." Her handwriting, her words. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. She looked at it for a long time. Then she whispered, "No." He nodded, closed the file. "You should be careful, Miss Layla. The royal family doesn't take kindly to misunderstandings." They released her that afternoon, but the world outside felt heavier. At school, her office had been emptied, her name removed from the teacher's board. No one looked her in the eye. By the next morning, her contract was terminated for professional misconduct. Still, she couldn't leave the city. Something in her refused to run. Maybe love, maybe guilt, maybe the quiet terror of not knowing whether he was alive. Then one night, she got another message. Unknown number, no greeting. "He's awake." Her heart stumbled. "Who is this?" she typed. No answer. A week later, the news channel showed a brief clip of Amir, pale, thinner, walking beside his father into a black car. Cameras flashed, questions shouted, and then he was gone, alive but changed. The following morning, her doorbell rang. A man in a suit stood there. "Miss Layla Nasser?" "Yes." He handed her an envelope. "From the office of His Highness, for your silence." Inside was a check, enough money to erase every struggle she'd ever known, and a letter written in handwriting she knew too well. "For your safety, don't contact me again. Forget me, Layla. For both of us." There was no signature, none was needed. She tore the check in half. She couldn't tear the letter. Days turned into weeks. The story faded from the news. The prince left the country for further recovery. Layla stayed in her apartment, a ghost in plain sight. Until one morning, she woke to find her door ajar, the lock unbroken, the room untouched, except for a single item on the kitchen counter, a white rose. She stared at it until the petals blurred. Then she laughed, a small, broken sound, because she knew what it meant. He was alive, he remembered, and she would never see him again. The next months passed in fragments. She found a job teaching online. She cut her hair. She stopped using the name Layla Nasser and became simply LN in her classes. But the past has a way of looping back. One evening, a young journalist named Kareem contacted her. "You don't know me," he said, "but I'm investigating something. The accident, the cover-up, the teacher they erased." She hung up. He called again the next day. "I have proof," he said. "He didn't crash alone." She froze. "What do you mean?" "There was another car, yours. It was following him." "But that's not all. The CCTV footage from that night was altered. I have the original." Her heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the truth is safer in two places than one." That was the beginning of her second undoing. Because the truth, once uncovered, doesn't stay buried. It claws its way out. Kareem met her at a small coffee shop that smelled of cardamom and printer ink. He was younger than she expected, eyes raw from too many sleepless nights, a messenger bag with a laptop, and an impossible hope. He didn't smile when he sat down. He opened his laptop and showed her a paused frame, grainy at the edge of clarity, of the coastal road the night of the crash. "There," he said. "See the second blur? That's not a reflection. That's a car, a civilian car. It follows Amir for 12 seconds, long enough to force a maneuver, long enough to change a life." Layla leaned forward until her breath fogged the screen. The grain became shape, a small compact, headlights low, tailing at a distance. It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. "How did you get this?" she whispered. "A guy in the traffic control room kept a copy," Kareem said. "Says his supervisor ordered him to delete it. He kept a backup." She swallowed. "Why are you showing me?" "Because they'll tell you to keep quiet," he said. "Because they tried to buy you. Because your name was erased. And because you deserve to tell the truth before they write it for you." They became careful, two people who had always been ordinary and suddenly had to be cunning. Kareem recorded their conversations, hid documents in cloud folders, and spoke in coded phrases in public. Layla gave him the small details she'd kept. The white rose, the messages, the way Amir's eyes had looked the last time she saw him. Kareem pushed, gently but persistently, until a pattern emerged, a list of small favors granted to specific contractors, a maintenance log that showed a security camera switched off for routine repair the night the crash occurred. They were building a scaffold of evidence out of other people's fear and a handful of pixels. It was fragile. It was human. Kareem published the first piece quietly, framed as a local interest story about discrepancies in traffic footage. It drew a few clicks, then more. An editor at a larger outlet picked it up and turned it into a thread. The thread found the public's impatient hand. People began to ask simple questions. Why had the footage been altered? Who benefited from the silence? Names that had been kept from public mouths began to appear in comment threads and shadow forums. The palace reacted as palaces do, with careful fury. Lawyers sent letters, polite and precise. The school issued a statement emphasizing the privacy of its students and the need for respect. The prince's father arranged for an internal review and called in favored journalists to reframe the narrative. It looked like damage control, and it was. But control can slip when enough people are watching. Then something unexpected happened. A taxi driver in Jumeirah registered a memory. He called Karim on a whim, an elderly man drawn by conscience or boredom, he could not say, and described a compact car that had stopped near an underpass. The night of the crash. The man said it had been driven by a woman who had argued with someone on the phone, then handed something over and left in a hurry. He didn't know names. He only knew the cadence of fear in the woman's voice. Karim and Layla followed the thread. It led them to a small neighborhood of rented apartments where contractors and night shift workers lived. They knocked on doors, offered water, exchanged names like currency. At a washer's stoop, a woman finally spoke. She had been paid a small sum to take a car that night, to park it and leave a light on. She swore she didn't know for whom. She swore she was afraid. She showed them a receipt, cash exchanged, a phone number scribbled on the back. The number led to a contact list that included a driver who had once done runs for the palace staff. He answered after 3 rings. His voice was careful at first, then blunt. "I didn't want to do it," he said. "They told me my son's school fees would be covered if I did. They said it was a harmless job. Just park, wait, leave. They gave me an envelope." "Who gave you the envelope?" Karim asked. He hesitated. "A woman. She came in a big car. She wore gloves." A woman who wore gloves, an odd detail, like a signature. They pressed. The driver's hands trembled as he spoke. He described a figure who watched them, with the concentration of someone ensuring something completed itself without witnessing it fully. He described a handover of a small device, a GPS jammer perhaps, something that could confuse sensors for minutes. He remembered the woman saying, "Don't be late, be sure you move away quickly." There was a language of urgency, not cruelty in her voice. He thought later that he had been paid too little to be a conspirator, yet too much to ignore. Karim ran the number through old databases. It traced awkwardly to a shell company associated, via a chain of intermediaries, to a concierge service used by the palace. The trace was not direct. It never is. Power makes sure of that. But it was enough to point at an architecture of quiet complicity. Those who move secrets like goods and then wash their hands. Word leaked. The news cycle tightened. Television hosts demanded interviews. The palace issued a third statement, firmer this time, promising full cooperation with investigators. People who had been quiet began to speak, then retract, then speak again. The pressure multiplied. Amir's absence had been explained away, but the man who returned in public appearances had the shadow of someone who had seen himself in a mirror and not liked the truth. He avoided cameras. He attended private functions with the composure of a learned actor. He watched the world as if it had turned on him. Layla lived the days in a strange alternation of relief and terror. Relief because the story could no longer be entirely ignored. Terror because something fundamental had already changed. Voices in the street spoke of honor and discretion. Editorials debated the right to privacy of a royal family. Protesters left flowers, and the city that had once been indifferent now had the nagging curiosity that makes document drawers creak. One night, after a piece that had traced the driver's receipt to a shell company, Karim received an anonymous message, a photo of a folding table in a garage, a close-up of a hand opening a small black case. Inside lay a ring, a receipt, and a slip of paper with a familiar phrase, "Do the right thing." The message had no signature. It had, however, one other element, a photograph of a woman's gloved hand, the cuff distinctive, monogrammed. The monogram matched the crest on a coat Layla once saw the headmistress wear at a gala. It was a clue so small that it could be coincidence, or so loud that it could not be ignored. They pursued it. Conversations that began as whispers now assumed a public shape. Lawyers asked for caution. Editors asked for proof. A court issued a limited subpoena for records tied to the shell company. The palace scrambled, offering access to security logs and insisting that all protocols had been followed. In the halls of power, the language was always precise. We cooperate, we regret, we affirm. But cooperation is only sometimes collaborative. It can also be a way to steer the narrative into waters still controlled. In a small office, lit by a single lamp, Layla watched footage Kareem had acquired from a journalist who had smuggled it out of a government server. It was grainy at the edge of legality, but the picture told a new story. A woman, gloved, entered the service corridor the night of the crash. She moved with confidence, not haste. She placed something into the compact car when it idled, a motion so quick it could be dismissed as luggage. She left with a calmness that suggested the job had been rehearsed. Layla's hands were cold. The image did not show a face, only gloves, the hem of a coat, the posture. But the posture was enough. They had gone far. They had asked for small confessions. They had pressed men who had carried envelopes into speaking, and now the light was on someone who moved through the night with intention. That intention demanded an answer. Kareem prepared to publish. He knew the risks. He knew the men who had left him anonymous threats. He knew the way power could use money and law to silence. But he had a hunger for a story that felt like more than clicks. "Are you ready?" he asked Layla. She looked at him, at the laptop, at the footage, at the evidence, pieces of a night that no longer seemed random but orchestrated. "I'm ready," she said. "If our names are going to be spoken, let them be the truth." He published the piece with a headline like a blade. New evidence shows. Civilian car followed Prince before crash. CCTV footage suggests deliberate interference. The servers groaned. The piece traveled through networks, across borders, into rooms where decisions that used to be private were now public. Within hours, the palace released a statement that read more urgent than before. Legal teams convened. An internal man was placed on leave. The headmistress resigned quietly, citing health reasons. Names that had been quiet for months moved like fish in changing water. And in the middle of all of it, a woman in a coat with a familiar cuff packed a small bag and left the city. She did not look back. She had known, perhaps, that the time to stay and answer had already passed. She chose instead to move into the shadow that power always reserves for itself: exile. Still, exile does not erase memory. It only relocates it. And memory, once given a voice, can echo back like a tide. The story didn't end with a verdict. Stories like these never do. They end in fragments. People scattered, promises broken, the truth too heavy for anyone to carry alone. When the investigation slowed, the city went back to pretending. The newspapers printed safer stories. The palace released statements about modernization and reform. The headlines became polite again. But the silence had already changed shape. It now had a name. It now had witnesses. Kareem's article kept echoing online, translated, reposted, archived. It spread beyond the reach of the lawyers. He became both respected and feared. Some called him brave, others called him reckless. He said neither word mattered. Only the evidence, he told Layla once. Only that it exists somewhere they can't delete it. She didn't see him again after that. He left Dubai quietly, called her from Istanbul one last time, and said, "You did what most people never dare. You told the truth." Then the line went dead, and she never heard from him again. Layla stayed, because leaving felt too much like surrender. She taught again, not at a palace school, not for children of power, but in a modest academy for orphans and workers' children. She taught them stories about civilizations that rose and fell, about choices that shaped destinies. She never mentioned the prince. She didn't have to. His story was still alive, whispered in corridors, dissected in quiet conversations. The teacher and the prince, the accident that wasn't, the love that wasn't supposed to happen. Some said he'd left the country for good. Others swore they'd seen him at the new marina, walking alone, head bowed. No one knew for sure. One evening, after her last class, Layla found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single photograph. Amir, standing by a balcony overlooking the sea, looking older, thinner, eyes still restless. On the back, written in his hand, "You were right. Love and duty can't coexist, but maybe love and truth can." She held the photograph for a long time. Then she placed it beside the first white rose he ever gave her, now pressed flat in an old book. For the first time in years, she didn't cry. She smiled, small, quiet, grateful, because she had survived the story, and that was enough. Weeks later, when a student asked her why history mattered, she said, "Because remembering is a kind of justice, and silence is a kind of death." The world kept moving. Towers rose higher, stories got buried faster. But sometimes, when the wind swept across the desert, carrying the smell of salt and dust, people swore they could hear the faint hum of a love that had refused to disappear. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was both. But even the most powerful palaces cannot silence a story once it's been spoken aloud. And this one, the story of a teacher and a prince, will keep whispering for generations. Because in the end, forbidden love isn't about how it begins. It's about how the world tries and fails to forget it. This has been another episode of Dark Whispers, True Crime Tales. If this story moved you, let it live a little longer. Like this video to help others find it. Share it with someone who loves powerful, haunting true stories. And comment below. Tell us where you're listening from tonight. Your voice keeps these whispers alive. Until next time. Remember, even in silence, the truth speaks.